Hey guys, what's going on? It's Jay from Sony Alpha Lab, and what I got here is the Mona Lisa on wheels. I was going to show you how I edited some of these photos for this video shoot slash photo shoot I did for a friend of mine, and I actually have a whole article dedicated to it here on my website. It's called the Mona Lisa on Wheels photo shoot, if you want to see how I did it and what gear I used and stuff like that. But I had a lot of questions. I actually put a little video, like promo video together for him as well. And but I got a lot of questions on the website when I was sharing these photos and stuff about how did I edit these photos, because the colors and the texture and stuff is just insane. So I wanted to show you how I did that. Now there's a couple different ways. Of course you can use plugins for this, which will save you a lot of time, but a lot of people don't want to buy plugins. I totally understand that. So I'm going to show you how you can do this in Lightroom. Now here is the original photo, and here is the edited photo, and I did this all in Lightroom, and it's really not that hard to do. So let me show you how I went about doing this. So let me just get rid of this tab here. So I'm in Lightroom and I'm in the development module. Now there's a lot of tools here in Lightroom on the right hand side, and I'm just going to go through and show you how I like to work. It's going to take a couple of minutes to get this done, but at the end of it, I think you will learn a bunch of tricks, and maybe this will help your workflow. And I also have some detail shots I wanted to show you. Here's a before and after of the detail shot of this lock. And you can see straight off the camera isn't too bad. I mean, it looks like a pretty decent shot, but then when you see the enriched shot, like the original, actually looks horrible. So stay tuned if you want to see how I do this stuff. Now here's the original again. So what I first need to do is I need to apply the lens profile correction. Now I used my Sony a7R and I was using a Canon lens, so I'm gonna have to navigate to the lens. Doesn't know what lens I was using, so I got to find it here, right here, Canon 135mm. So you can see it did a pretty good job just correcting the distortion. There's a little bit of distortion, a little bit of vignette, nothing crazy, but I always do that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of sharpening to it and drag the masking up, just so the sharpening only applies to the edges. And you could drag that up a little bit higher because I want a little extra detail, and close that down. Then I'm going to add a medium contrast tone curve, as you can see right there. Just added the tone curve. Then I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to add some texture, add a little bit of clarity, and then I'm going to bring the vibrance up. And you can see the vibrance is what's really bringing in that color on the truck. So let me just grab the crop tool and adjust this because it's crooked, and I don't really like that. So somewhere right around there looks correct to my eye. Something like that. There we go. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the adjustment brush tool right here. And in here you can select whatever settings you want and then just brush them into the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click the effect and then to reset everything. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the dehaze up, and I'm going to drag the clarity up, and then I'm going to select my flow down here for the actual brush. And notice how it's set to 45. I'm going to put that at 50. And then I'll make my brush size a little bigger. You can drag this over to do that, or you can just use the right bracket keys and left bracket key to make it bigger and smaller. So somewhere right around there looks good. And I'm just going to brush in a little bit of that dehaze, like so. I'm also going to drag the exposure down. Now you can fine tune that adjustment after the fact. So you can see here, this little dot is the actual adjustment brush. And if you hover over it, it'll show you the mask of where you painted. If you just hover over that adjustment point, and you could then, if you have that adjustment point selected, you could then do whatever you want. You can adjust it after the fact. See that? So I'm going to drag the exposure down a little bit, and I'm actually going to just turn a little bit towards the left for the temperature because I added a little bit of warmth in it, a little more than I wanted. And you can just paint away there and get a little bit of adjustment. So that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to close this. Now what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of a vignette to really draw the eye in to the truck. Something like that. Then I'll drag the midpoint out a little bit, and then I will feather it like so. And I know that looks like a little bit too much. I usually go a little too far, and then I will back it off somewhere right about there. You can turn the effect on and off here to see what you actually did with these little switches. Now I want to really burn in the edges a little bit more, so I want to show you how to do that. Basically, you just select this graduated filter tool, and again, you get this effect panel here where you can make any effects you want. I'm just going to reset it. I'm going to drag the exposure down, like so. And then I'm going to click and drag on the edges. And I'm just basically bringing the exposure down. Now watch, I can adjust it and bring it down a lot. See, that's too much. Somewhere right about there looks pretty good though. And then I'm going to click on the top and drag that down, really burn in those edges. Try to get it straight. Same thing on this side. And then on the bottom, I'm going to drag it up a little bit higher, right about there. So that gets you pretty good, pretty close to where you want to be. As far as what I want to do for this edit, I could bring the texture up a little bit more. Maybe just raise the vibrance a little bit more. Play with the clarity just that little bit, right about there. Now one other thing I want to do is I'm going to go back to this adjustment brush tool, double click the effect, and then I'm going to raise the exposure up for this particular brush. And I'm going to make my brush smaller by using the left bracket key. And I'm just going to paint the last chance salvage over here and the little fence for the tailgate just to brighten it up that little bit. And then I could back that off that little bit. One other thing I wanted to do was the foliage in the background is really green. So I want to change that a little bit. So what you can do is you can go into the hue, saturation, luminance slider over here and just select the hue option. If you click this little button here, it'll bring out this selector tool. And if you click on the color that you want, you can then drag. And notice how it's bringing the greens over more towards the oranges. And that'll help tone down that green that little bit and really, just help bring more attention to the truck, in my opinion. And I think that looks a little bit better. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up and I'm going to bring the blacks down a little bit just to get a little bit more contrast like that. And then I'm going to drag the highlights down just a little bit. Make sure I get all that highlight detail on the truck. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the shadows just a touch, bring in a little bit of shadow detail. And I'll raise the overall exposure just a little bit by clicking in the histogram here. And I think we're looking pretty good. Let's bring the dehaze up a touch. Right about there. Alright, so let me show you a before and after. You can see I made a lot of adjustments there. Here's a before and here's an after. So you can see it looks pretty darn good in my opinion. And compared to the edited version, it's a little bit different. The edited version looks a little bit cooler, but I actually like the Lightroom version a little bit better, to be honest with you. It looks a little bit warmer, and overall, I'm pretty happy with the result. Now, let's move on to a detail shot. We have a lock here. This is in the bed, and this is actually locking where the gas tank is. There's like a little flap that opens up, and I just edited that to enhance it. So let me show you what I did here. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to go to the lens correction again and enable it, and it's already enabled. I was using the new SONY E16 to 55mm lens, which is absolutely phenomenal, by the way. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to go up here and add a medium contrast, like so. And you can see it's just really blue looking, so I'm going to need to warm this up. So let's go to the temperature and drag it to the right, so we get somewhere that looks pretty good, right about there. Then I'm going to drag the clarity up a little bit. That looks pretty good. Clarity seems to suck out some of the color, so I'm going to drag the vibrance up now, just to bring that color back. And that's looking pretty good. I'm going to drag the shadows up a little bit, and now I'm going to go back down and drag the vignette in. Midpoint, and then I'm going to feather it that little bit. I'm going to go back up here and make it a little bit warmer. I'm just going to drag it a tick to the green, like so. Drag the exposure up just a touch, and then I'm going to go back to the graduated filter here, and I'm just going to click and drag to bring the exposure down. But notice how the exposure is at 0.6, so I'm just going to drag that down. That looks pretty good. And then I could drag the dehaze up a little bit, and you can see how it just brings in that texture, which I really like. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the adjustment brush, double click the effect, and then I'm going to drag the dehaze up to about 25, and I'm going to paint with that sucker on a couple of spots here like this. That'll just bring in some extra detail, and then I'm going to hit up the lock with it. And that looks pretty good. So then I'm going to close this. I'm going to go back down to the hue saturation slider, and I'm going to switch to saturation. And this time I'm going to click over here where it looks like there's a little bit of blue. And you can see on the slider on the right how it's taking the blue out of the lock. You see that? So something like that looks pretty good. Then I'm just going to drag the contrast up a little bit and maybe just add a little bit more warmth. Let's raise the exposure a touch to get a little bit more brightness. Right about there. Alright, so that looks pretty good. And if I show you a before and after, here's a before. You could see this looks horrible comparatively. Now look at the after. And it's really not that hard to do. You can see I'm just basically playing around with the sliders in Lightroom here, and I'm using the tool, the graduated filter tool and the brush adjustment tool. Those are the key concepts I'm trying to teach you here. Now here's another image, and this one is a pretty cool shot of the light on the top of the truck. So let me show you what I can do to this one. I haven't played with this one yet, so this will be the first time messing around with it. First thing I like to do is adjust for the rule of thirds to make the composition a little more interesting, and something like this looks pretty good to my eye, like so. Then I'm going to drag the warmth up right about there. That's looking pretty good. And next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the clarity up a little bit, and texture, and then vibrance. Oh yeah, I'm liking that. I'm just going to swivel the purple and green just a little bit to the left there. Raise the warmth a little bit more. Right about there. Alright, so now I'm going to grab the adjustment brush tool, and I'm going to raise the exposure, and I'm going to paint on this light to get a little more brightness out of it, almost to make it look like it's on. Like so. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to close this. I'm going to do a medium contrast. That'll bring that down a bit. I'm going to select the hue, and I'm going to click and drag. Let's see what this does. Alright, it's bringing in a little bit of more magenta. Let me click over here. Same thing. Alright, that's not too bad. So let me scroll up to shadows, and again, you just kind of play around. You don't really know always what's going to happen when you're using these adjustments. Sometimes this luminance saturation thing doesn't work out for you. So now I'm going to bring another heavy vignette in here, back it off, like so. And I'm just going to brighten the image a little bit. Again, you can just click in this histogram up top and drag to manipulate your photo, which is pretty awesome. You can also click and drag on this tone curve to manipulate the image. I'm going to back that off just a touch, and then I'm going to add a little bit of shadow. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. Let me just add a little bit more warmth here. Okay, right about there. I'm pretty happy with that result. And if you hit the backslash key, you can see a before and an after. So again, I mean, huge difference. And it only took about a minute to do that. Now, one last image I want to show you is this cool old license plate. And the guy I did this for really loves this particular license plate, so I want to make sure that I edited this detail shot. And you can see it's really flat looking. So I'm going to add a contrast. I'm just going to go to a strong contrast, in fact, like so. Then I'm going to need some vibrance for sure. Something like that. I could drag up the dehaze, and you can see that dehaze is doing a pretty good job already. Drag the texture up. This overall brightness I could bring up. And then I can also drag the highlights, bring the highlights down so I don't blow anything out. Add a little shadow just to brighten it a little bit more. So let me add a little bit of a vignette here. There we go. Drag the brightness up a touch. And close this down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the brush, and I'm going to double click on the effect to reset everything. And I'll just drag the exposure up a little bit. And I'm just going to paint on this license plate to brighten it in a few areas. I'll make my brush a little bigger. That looks pretty good. So again, I basically just manipulated the sliders a little bit and used the adjustment brush to add a little local adjustment. And you can see here, if I do a before and after, there's the before and there's an after. So didn't really do too much to it, but it looks like, just a way better photo at the end of the day. That's pretty much what I wanted to show you in this quick Lightroom tutorial. And I went a little bit faster than normal when I was using these sliders here because I already have 2 other Lightroom videos to break you in if you've never used Lightroom before. And I go a lot slower in those videos and show you in more detail what each of these sliders do and how to do it. So be sure to check out those other Lightroom editing videos if you're just starting out, because I did go quite a bit faster in this particular tutorial. Alright guys, I really appreciate you checking out this video, and be sure to subscribe if you're looking for more of this stuff, and if you have any questions, be sure to ask below the video. I don't mind at all. I really appreciate your questions, and I'm more than happy to help. So, alright buddies, talk to you later.